Fire. When most of us hear that a forest is burning, it makes us quite uneasy. After all, Smokey Bear taught us well that fire destroys the woods and all that live there. But in the southern pine forest, the wild residents not only tolerate periodic fires, but require them for their very survival. Let's look at the southern pine woods and see why fires are necessary to the special animals and plants that live there. First, let's look back to a time when the Southland was all wilderness. Colossal forests of longleaf pine stretched over 60 million acres, from Virginia, south through Florida, and westward into Texas. The Southeast is the lightning capital of North America. More thunderstorm days and lightning strikes are recorded here than anywhere else on the continent, especially during the late spring and early summer. And with storms and lightning comes fire. Wind-driven flames move through every few years. They were relatively mild and could sweep the forest floor without eliminating either pines or ground cover plants. Fire reduces brush and undergrowth and releases nutrients that recycle into the soil to feed new plant growth. If fire occurs frequently, it keeps the dead and dying plant matter or fuel at a low level on the forest floor. With very little fuel to feed them, damaging wildfires are rare. Fire also creates openings in the pine forest. Plants and animals that prefer to live in sunny open spaces thrive here. Let's take a closer look at this forest that fire made. Stately longleaf pines dominate the rolling park-like woodlands. They rise above a prairie of grasses and forbs surrounding small groves of oaks. The entire life cycle of longleaf pine is linked to frequent low-intensity fire. Its big winged seeds can germinate and grow only if they fall on sparsely vegetated or bare earth, for they cannot penetrate dense vegetation to reach the soil. Once a seedling becomes established, it remains low to the ground like a clump of grass for several years. The growing bud is sheathed in silver scales and shielded by a cloak of long, moisture-filled needles. Fires that pass through reduce tree diseases such as needle blight. The young longleaf pine stores its energy and builds a carrot-like taproot. Then it bolts upward several feet each year. In just a few growing seasons, it has become a tree. When the next fire comes, its top is usually well out of reach of the flames. The adult tree is protected by thick layers of flaky bark that insulate the inner living tissues from fire and heat. Longleaf pine is so fire resistant that some trees always escape injury from a burn. These trees become seed trees and reforest the burned area. But all these adaptations protect the tree only if fires are frequent and therefore mild. Although pine trees fuel the ground beneath them with dry needles, it is the bunch grasses such as wiregrass that spread fire through the habitat. The thin leaves of this ancient plant burn readily, even when they are green and moist. Like the longleaf pine seedlings, wiregrass clumps recover quickly once a fire has passed. Biologists are just beginning to learn how fires set at different times of the year affect the plants that live in the forest. Wiregrass, for example, produces abundant flowers and seed if a fire has occurred during the peak season of lightning-set fires. This fire was set on the first day of June to rejuvenate an old longleaf forest. Flames scorched this young pine, still in the early grass stage. The fire moved erratically through the forest, leaving green patches of vegetation here and there. Several hours later, the woods looked scorched and barren. Only 1 week later, the woods are greening up. Birds that lost a nest to the fire are rebuilding and laying new eggs. By early July, 4 weeks after the fire, the woods are full of life again. Young pines and wiregrass unfold new growth. Patches of wildflowers spring up in the sunny areas opened up by the burn. Morning glory, yellow star flower, and blue phlox thrive in these open glades. Others like butterfly weed and blazing star are critical nectar sources for the thousands of butterflies that move through each fall. Some tubular flowers like the coral bean provide nectar used by the hummingbird. Since flowering occurs almost exclusively after fire, biologists believe that summer or growing season burns are important to these beautiful migrants. In this forest without fire, biologists have tracked a substantial 76% decrease in the total number of birds using the area. And only 1/2 of the number of different kinds of birds still occur on the plot after 20 years of fire exclusion. Biologists worry because many of these species have become increasingly rare in the wild. Curious among birds, the red-cockaded woodpecker nests only in living, veteran pines that often exceed 100 years in age. This small black and white bird, common in the pinelands at the turn of the century, lives in family groups and forages in open woods. The lovely bluebird also prefers the open habitat of old-growth longleaf pine woods. This bird lays its eggs in an abandoned woodpecker cavity in a dead tree, or even among upturned tree roots. But like the red-cockaded woodpecker, bluebirds and others, including red-headed woodpeckers, nuthatches, native sparrows, and chats, have dwindled as the open forests disappear. The southern fox squirrel is the largest tree squirrel and most variably colored mammal in North America. It spends much of its time on the ground beneath old pine forests. Its dark fur camouflages the animal on burned terrain and tree trunks. The squirrel's large size enables it to travel far and tear apart large cones for food. It also digs up, eats, and scatters the spores of a truffle-like fungus, an underground mushroom that helps longleaf pines extract nutrients from the soil. Many animals that cannot climb trees or fly often seek shelter from the sun, flame, frost, or enemy in the burrow of a gopher tortoise. Some of these species are not only rare, but actually live nowhere else but with gopher tortoises. Well over 100 kinds of animals use tortoise burrows. The plants and animals that live in pine forests and neighboring bogs are in trouble today. More than 95% of the magnificent woods have been cut down and replaced with cities, croplands, or dense tree farms. People have dissected the remaining woods to such an extent that any free-ranging fire would threaten houses or other structures. So, as crucial as fire is to the last relics of longleaf forest, natural fires aren't usually permitted to burn. In fact, nowhere in the southeast can fire move freely across the landscape as it did in early times. For this reason, prescribed burns are now used by professional land managers. The burn team must wait for a day with high humidity and a light, steady wind. They must also consider a complex set of conditions that determine how quickly the smoke will dissipate. A week or two before a plot of land is burned, workers make fire breaks to keep the flames under control. Fires are set with a drip torch containing a blend of diesel fuel and gasoline. A trained member of a burn team walks along with an inverted torch, dripping spots of burning fuel. A second worker closely follows, raking pine needles and other combustible plant matter away from the flames. These slow-moving, creeping flames are called a backfire because they burn against the wind. Backfires are used on days with risky weather conditions, lots of wind or too little humidity. They allow fire managers to keep the burn under careful control. Workers jump out 4 or 5 feet from the first fire line and set another strip. In this way, the workers move across the area prescribed for burning, setting parallel lines of fire about 30 meters apart. Over these short distances, the fire cannot gain enough momentum to range out of control. Managers call this mop-up work. Team members must constantly double back to make sure the fire doesn't escape across the road or a fire break. Workers also look for smoldering tree trunks or stumps like this one and douse them with water or dirt. Downed wood may otherwise smoke and burn for weeks or even reignite an unwanted fire. In recent years, professional burners have begun to use aerial ignition. With this method, fire is dropped in spots to burn many small areas quickly. This allows fuel reduction over large areas, plus good dispersal of smoke in a short time period. Prescribed fire has several other important uses, including clearing unwanted vegetation in and around farm fields, controlling certain plant diseases and insect pests, reducing hazardous fuels, stimulating growth of pine timber used for wood products, and improving conditions for wildlife. Properly used, prescribed burning can also substitute for nature's way of renewing the entire forest ecosystem. but only if society will allow its continued use. It's not controlled fire itself that concerns most people, but the smoke it generates. Fire managers know smoke can drift to areas where it may sometimes limit visibility on roads. They work very hard today to control both fire and its smoke to have the minimum possible effect on people. Every year, the restrictions on prescribed burning grow tighter because most people don't understand the natural role of fire. But the consequences of eliminating this management tool would be grave indeed. As we have seen, fire exclusion would set the stage for destructive wildfires. We cannot afford to lose our natural heritage, for there are no real substitutes for fire in the wild. So the next time you see prescribed burning in the forest or a cloud of wood smoke, please remember, fire is an age-old process, one that provides many benefits to society and gives life to much that is wild and free.